This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
Assembly, some of the things that we saw run through at that time when it was just CDF and then it became NGCDF thereafter. You'll give us some insights into that. And then we'll look at, the pulse of the nation through protests and again, from a legal point of view, what it would look like today. So thank you for being here. Dennis is going to share a proverb as usual, and we'd like to hear your interpretation of that.
A proverb today comes from the beautiful country, Kenya. A country whose economy continues to be resilient despite the challenges it faces. You talk about tourism of the country, one of the greatest, one would say, with the eighth wonder of the world, Masai Mara, and the wild beast migration. Amazing stuff in this country. And talk about the people. Any country is as good as its people. Look at how all the communities have come together to have this country called Kenya, and our athletes are amazing individuals who, despite the challenges, despite brutality that we see outside the country, flying our flag high and breaking records, we forever continue to celebrate them. Agriculture, important aspect of the GDP, one of the greatest drivers of the economy in the country, and one would only hope that the country would get to the next level and continue being great. Our proverb today comes from the mountain and says, "A man who uses force is afraid of reasoning." How would you interpret that?
If I were to use just a simple word, I would say dictator. But it is true. A man who uses force is afraid of reasoning. Is one that will obviously tend to be so egoistic, that they think that their opinions, their views on any issue are final and must not be subjected to any scrutiny by others. So that kind of person, particularly in leadership, obviously mutates from, with time into a dictator. Yeah.
It's either their way or the highway. Well put.
Well, you come back and we talk about a number of things, JB, this morning, and the NGCDF controversy. We'd like to go through that a little bit. And this is all that sets against the backdrop of a nation which is reeling from the effects of protests that took place. Looking at the number now, we're at 31 died. Some of them died on the day. Others have succumbed to injuries that they got from, most of them in this case, unfortunately, gunshots. And that's the backdrop that this play is being set on. And that when we see such things happening in the country, and when we hear that, police not doing the things that one would ask them to do, we start to ask questions about what really is going on. But let's go into this NGCDF, because it sets the tone for a number of things in terms of constitutionalism, in terms of the law, in terms of what should be followed, vis-a-vis what would be seen as selfish ploys to then be able to have some kind of political control or expediency in your little turf. We started to have this conversation with you before. And in terms of what the CDF at the time was meant to do versus what it has been turned into today versus what the law says, we'd like to get your take on that as we go into this discussion.
Very well. I think I don't need to go to the history.
No.
Because that's already well known to many Kenyans. And of course, I've heard the story and the argument that has been put by most members of the National Assembly. But if you ask any of them, the first thing they point about was, without CDF, we'll not be able to pay bursaries, and several children will not be able to go to school. Will not be able to put up, schools, administrative places, police stations, and such like. So I've always paused and wondered, Bursary in itself, in my opinion, creates some form of dependency. In fact, it tends to patronize people, patronize parents, because the parents who are able to reach the member of parliament and the member of parliament's cronies or supporters are the ones who benefit. And it is not true, and I'm saying this from experience, because I've seen it. You may go to a constituency and still find people. Even today, I still get people coming to tell me, please, my child cannot go to school. I've been chased away from school because of school fees. So I tell them, but why don't you go to the CDF office? He says, no, but we have tried. It doesn't work. So that is the reason why I say no. This argument about bursary, and I think I would want to really caution Kenyans again, because the Kenyans over time, because of the way this thing has been sold, they have started buying it. Even when members of parliament were actually going around, you see some parents saying, I saw one case where a parent said, my 3 children have been educated. But you see, in that same constituency or even locality, it will not be surprising or shocking to find that there are others whose children have either had to drop out of school or go to look for help elsewhere. And besides, I keep wondering, this bursary being given by member of parliament in the National Assembly, bursary being given by the woman rep, bursary being given by the MCA, bursary being given by the governor, bursary being given by the Ministry of Education itself.
Yes.
And I'm saying this because I know it. Bursary being given by the president.
Yes, the president's fund for education.
How many people will reach the president? How will the president know how many children are not able to go to school for lack of school fees so that he can give them bursary? It's only those who are close to him. It's not, and it's not rocket science to know that this is a most undesirable system. And in its place, I've argued, not just about CDF, I've argued that we should make education free for everybody. If indeed we truly believe that education is the greatest equalizer, as we know now, as stated by the late Nelson Mandela. Second, why should members of parliament be the ones to build schools? Why do we have a Ministry of Education? The Ministry of Education has got a planning department. They should know at the touch of a button how many public schools there are in the country and plan for them. Do a budget showing that we require so much funds to construct schools and spread it across boards so that the members of parliament will be able to then look through in their oversight work and representation work to see, yes, there is a school in their places, this has been considered. That is the work of representation. They will be able to present to parliament all the needs, and then the ministry will be able to come up and say, look, this particular financial year, we'll be able to fund this and this in this place, but make sure that there is equity, equitable distribution.
JB, allow me to ask you, you said that MCAs have bursary, right?
Yeah.
Give out bursaries. Members of parliament give out bursaries. We know this. Governors give out bursaries. There are bursaries that come from the Ministry of Education. Then there's the President's Fund, of course, that gives out bursaries. This MP and MCA, where do these funds come from?
If you go to the county assemblies, MCAs, always when they're passing a budget, there's always some money given to them for purposes of giving out bursaries in their areas of representation. The members of parliament, of course, in the National Assembly, CDF. Women rep, NGAF. That kitty they're calling NGAF.
Yes.
Governors, of course, they use all manner of methods to, most likely from the shareable revenue that is given through the county allocation revenue law. The president, the Ministry of Education. Let me give you an example. many years back, I was shocked. My son was a student at Alliance Boys, and I had paid school fees. I normally used to pay for the full year because I didn't want interruptions, because I was still in politics and I didn't want to be told that there's this or the other. One time I got shocked when the principal there, Mr. Kayemba, called me and told me, we have a check from the Ministry of Education. Money has come here. Says that it's paying school fees for your son.
Okay.
I told him, no, but I've paid. I paid the school fees. Where does it come from? From the Ministry of Education.
Allocated to you without your knowledge or without
my knowledge
or your request.
I have no business here usually to request to be paid school fees for by the ministry. So what I'm talking about is something that I know happens, and if you talk to the people in the ministry, they have a way they do those things. And don't forget that. You remember there was a story about some school somewhere in Kakamega. Somebody from the ministry, and was sending money to the non-existent school. So there's so much, and that is now the work that parliamentarians should concentrate on, ensuring that there is equity and accountability.
So you do agree that members of parliament should not be handling funds according to the Constitution, but that they should be focusing on representation, they should be focusing on legislation, and they should be focusing on oversight?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because I know for a fact, and I think I'm yet to hear of any parliament that is not established to play those three roles that you've very well articulated: oversight, legislation, and representation. And let me put it this way. For instance, when a member of parliament is dishing out bursaries, if a complaint were to arise, as I'm sure there are, it's only that people don't know where to take those complaints. They should go to the Auditor General to go and say, look, the way this money was allocated, it was ambiguous, it was not clear to everybody. Not everybody who applied got, and those who applied did not get what they thought would be sufficient to cater for their needs. Now, if the Auditor General were to come up with a report indicting that process, that report of the Auditor General, as is the case, if you look at Article 229 of the Constitution, the Auditor General reports to Parliament and to the county assemblies. Parliament is the duality, both the National Assembly and the Senate. Now, so a committee of Parliament is supposed to go and look through that report of the Auditor General, even with regard, not just bursaries, even with regard to other projects, implementation of other projects. And I have seen many reports by the Auditor General over the years. But to date, not a single report from the committee, initially Public Accounts Committee, secondly Special Funds Accounts Committee in the National Assembly, not a single report ever indicts or ever finds fault. Reason is simple. Those committees are also made of members of parliament who also have CDF, CDCs, they are called Constituency Development Committees. So, obvious, a very incestuous relationship exists, because the Auditor General is supposed to be the technical wing of any parliament, not just the Kenyan parliament. Now, they are supposed to help. The Auditor General helps parliaments in the oversight work. But this generally must be of the executive. So when members of parliament are implementing projects, no matter which, constructing police stations, constructing chief's offices or other administrators' offices, as they claim to be doing. Now, if there's something fishy in the procurement process, the Auditor General will always pick those things. And I used to see them as speaker, because I would never approve the tabling of the report before going through it myself. And I would see so many areas which have been flagged off. So, but the speaker the Speaker's work is not to go and debate. You can't even vote. The Constitution says very clearly the Speaker has no vote. Speaker cannot even move a motion. Or even a report, even when you chair. I said it the other day. Even when you chair a committee, like public appointments, parliamentary approval committee for cabinet secretaries and such like offices. The Speaker is the chairperson or chairman, as the case may be. And when the report is being tabled, it has to be moved by either the leader of majority or the deputy speaker. And that report can even be torn into pieces, notwithstanding, and the speaker will be sitting there, presiding. But you have nothing, there's nothing you can say. You cannot even tell somebody, no, we know, we consider that issue. No, because you are a presiding officer, not a member participating in the debate.
Yes.
And therefore, this issue of accountability is so critical. Oversight. You cannot oversight yourself. That is the long and short of what I'm arguing is putting in a whooping. Like I think I saw this financial year, the NGCDF has been allocated, I think, between 62 or 64 billion Kenya shillings. I just remember the other day, the argument that the counties were looking for. They got an increment of about 10 billion, surely. But we are giving members of parliament 64 billion shillings or 62 billion shillings. I think the GAF is about 4 billion. Now you look at it, you wonder, how about if this money was given to the counties?
That's like about 220 million shillings per constituency.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the list that I've had is about 164 million per year to some members. In the last financial year, I've had some say so. But of course, the other thing I want to say openly, and I've said it without fear in the past. I think I did it. I put it on my X account. I have seen situations where you go to some constituencies and then you see the people who are hanging around some members of parliament. You try to find out who they are, and you're told that they are contractors. Because remember, these members are also doing that's RMRF fund, road maintenance levy. They also get huge sums of money, and that's why they have been having a war with the governors and the senators. So you find them with people, then you later find out, oh, that's the contractor, that's the one who is doing that, that's the one who is doing that school, that's the one who is doing that. Then you wonder, this relationship is not good. But, well, I said at that time, those members of parliament who can remember quietly, because the speaker cannot go to speak on the floor, quietly, from the time that the TISA, the Institute for Social Accountability, went to court in 2013, I told members, for me, since the promulgation of the new constitution, I've always argued with some of my friends who are deeply involved in coming up with the constitution. The CDF has no place after the promulgation of the constitution, because it has become a third tier of resource allocation. Yet, the Kenyan people in nearly 2/3 who approved the new constitution were very clear that they gave 2 tiers, 2 levels of government. Therefore, 2 levels of resource allocation, national and county. If national government wants us to abdicate its responsibility of building schools or building offices for its administrators, let it say so. But let us not interfere with devolution unless you go to a referendum. That's the people, because that's the people who go and make the decision themselves.
JB, my question is, around this discussion, whenever there's a money issue in the House, and I'm referring to Parliament, you'll always get a quorum, and you'll always get members of Parliament fighting to have what they're looking for, whenever it comes to money. I want to zoom out a bit, go back to 2003. This is when we had the CDF Act. What was the rationale? Because I see where the problem started was back then, because at the time, under President Mwai Kibaki, free primary education, coming up with this, the idea was to try and decentralize development from a national perspective to go to the grassroots level, where you're channeling funds so that they can reach what you call the Wanjiko in the village. But in formulating the act itself, didn't we foresee that in the future this was going to create a monster? Because what we are dealing with now is actually a monster. Because you go back to the creation, the intent and the spirit around why this was actually created was to offer education solutions when at the time it appeared to be controlled by the national government.
Very well put. Maybe I could actually go slightly beyond 2003, because I was in Parliament. And maybe even before I went to Parliament myself. You know, under the KANU regime, starting way back in the mid-80s, they had begun developing something in the country where from around 1985, 86, around there, if you went around, you would see some people who are close to the president or to the powers that were. They would be invited to do harambes. And they would appear with huge sums of money at the time. And it became a concern to very many people. But you know, at that time, Mzee Moi, he would come, people like the late Kuria Kanyingi and some others I may not wish to name, they would appear carrying huge sums. And then Mzee Moi, if he's the one presiding, you say, this is a development conscious leader. You are development conscious because of the amount of money that you are donating. Yet you look at the person donating, at that time, somebody donating 500,000 shillings. You go back, you look at their salary, you wonder, hey, this guy doesn't even earn 50,000. How is it that he's able to raise
500,000?
500,000.
And then, you remember those days, you'd say, from me and my friends, which friends will never be disclosed. And I think that's where we began sowing the seed for rampant corruption. Because those undisclosed friends were usually people who would be getting favors from those officers, those public servants. District commissioners, as they were known then, these days they are called county commissioners or things like those, names like those ones. You would see them in harambes donating huge sums of money from himself and friends. I mean, who are these friends? So that's where the rain began beating us. Now, at that time, the salary of a member of parliament was very meager. It's very little. So, and I remember, in fact, I look with nostalgia when I remember what I used to hear leo katika bunge, because the members of parliament would be raising issues that we don't have a road here, we don't have a cathode here, we don't have a school here, our school doesn't have teachers in this place, because they were playing real representation of their constituents. Because, as I say kwa Kiswahili, kupiga mdomo hiyo kabisa. Now, fast forward, we have introduced the clamor for multipartism, a repeal of Section 2A in 1991, multipartism, but still, the members of parliament were still the members were being paid from Harambee House. Parliament was at that time actually an extension. The president used to appoint the clerk of parliament. All the staff were just seconded from ministries, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Interior, and such like. So the clamor continued, and now the people who are close to the center of power became even more aggressive, always donating huge sums, and these are the people who would always be praised as being the development conscious leaders. And you see, at this time we have also gotten people in the opposition, and people are wondering, where are people getting so much money? And of course, it would be shown as a person who is not development conscious, because even people who come and say, oh, look, people want to challenge you in an election, will go as long as they have done their dirty things wherever they may be placed. They'll come and make huge contributions. But you, as a member of parliament, maybe you can only afford 5,000 shillings because you want to live within your means. Yes. Now, this began, they say in Kiswahili, kukera. Mm-hmm. It began to get agitating members of parliament. I said, look, if we have to also show something, that we are doing something, and we are not stealing, we don't want to steal. This money must come from taxpayers. And let us create a mechanism of how it is going to be administered, because it was getting very nasty. So towards the end of the 8th Parliament, around 2001, Engineer Karue, who was then Member of Parliament, I think for Kalau or someplace like that, in Nyandarua, came up with a private member's motion seeking to establish a fund to be administered within each constituency to cater for public projects, and that the Member of Parliament will now be able to sit with his committee to decide where development would go. But at that time, it was put that that figure would be not more than 2%, not more than 2.5%. No, not less than 2.5% of the national budget. That motion was passed in the 8th Parliament, but it was given leave to introduce a bill for an act of Parliament. But that 8th Parliament was then dissolved. Come the 9th Parliament in 2003, that Member of Parliament, by the way, he was from the Democratic Party, which I happily lead today.
Yes.
And that was Kibaki's party. So come 2003, and Kibaki is the president. So Engineer Karue and several members then began now pushing for that law. And you will be surprised. The law was passed because it became very popular. Most members were saying, no, this is the right way to go. At that time, remember, there was no devolution. So the law was passed. Some people now in government who had also been with Engineer Karue in the opposition began now resisting the implementation of that law. In fact, at some point, they even tried to lobby President Kibaki not to assent to it. But President Kibaki assented to it. The other part began. How do you get money? Budgeting begins around the month of September. Kibaki comes into office on 31st, he's sworn in on 31st of December 2002. So in January or thereabouts, we are in Bunge. We push through, the law is passed by about March or thereabouts. And we were insisting that then Cabinet Minister Mwiraria has to give money. And it was a big fight. But would you be surprised? The first amount of money that was given to each member of parliament was 6 million shillings.
But what was it for?
It was now to go and do public projects. The design was you go and involve your constituents in every part.
Find out what they needed.
Find out what was urgent, the things that maybe primary school here, maybe some infrastructure of sorts, things like those.
But how do you budget before doing a project evaluation, before going out to find out what are the projects and how much money is needed? What is the rationale?
Once you got in the money, that's when you do that's when you go to do the...
So you work around the 6 million?
Yes. You have to work around, but you see, it was a drop in the ocean.
But JB, even when
even then, you can say, but I gave the historical background to really understand why this thing was there. But now, with the devolution, of course, things changed with the new constitution. I mean, there's no way you can have because devolution says, if you look at Article 174, it says that the objects that every devolved unit, devolved government has to devolve its services to the lowest level possible in a county. So that includes the constituency, includes the ward.
So, JB, as we talk about CDF, one would say we know the roles of a member of parliament. Handling money is not their work. But then again, members of parliament are pushing to have these NGCDF be actually an act of parliament. And one just ask a basic question. Is this money being used as a political card and lifeline for them to continue being in power?
In fact, it is not, already it exists in an act of parliament. Now they want, because that which is the one the courts have declared unconstitutional.
Yes.
And more profoundly, the judgment of the Supreme Court delivered on 8th of August 2022 was very clear that a member of parliament cannot, implementation of a project is an executive function. And if we are to be honest with ourselves, the principle of separation of powers, which is one of the hallmarks of our constitution, is then infringed when a member of the legislature is involved in projects implementation. That is a function of the executive. So that when they implement, the Auditor General comes and audits the implementation process and program, the success or otherwise of it, then reports to Parliament so that Parliament will be able to oversight. Now, because members of Parliament in the National Assembly have always fought this thing, and I kept telling them, this thing, as the way I see it, you cannot win in the courts. Those who can to consult me about it, and they're always very unhappy with me. But the Speaker speaks, discusses those things offline. I'd always tell them, look, and even when the judgment was delivered, I remember posting it to some of my good friends. I told them, I told you, this is what I've always been telling you, because they lost in the High Court, they lost in the Court of Appeal. Finally, they have lost in the Supreme Court. Actually, I think this is a constitutional heresy, what they are doing today. It is trying to fight that judicial decision. Yet, the principle of separation of powers remains as one of the anchors of our constitution. I therefore believe that what they have done will still be challenged in courts. But let me also add this: the executive, in its bid to ensure continued loyalty and a stranglehold on Parliament, is the one that proposed this thing. I was the Attorney General. I remember I was told to go and make this proposal. At that time, we were talking about how do we implement the 2/3 gender rule. That was the issue. And I said it had proved, for the 10 years I was Speaker, it had proved so difficult that we were never at any one time able to raise the 2/3. So it was decided that to put a sweetener, put in anchor CDF as one of the amendments to the Constitution, so that you amend Articles 97 and 98 for the Senate so as to do the top-up methods, which is done in the counties under Article 176. But for it to pass, this transgender rule, that amendment, you have to put something that is going to attract every member from the 290 single-member constituencies.
This time you're AG?
Yes.
I'm
And
sorry.
who's telling you to do this?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Is this what you suggested, or is this what was being told to you? Because let's get it clear here that the 2/3 gender rule at the time, which, by the way, up until now has not been achieved, Chief Justice David Maraga Emeritus said dissolve Parliament because they've not been able to get there. But you're saying that essentially the 2/3 gender rule, again, reintroduced to members of Parliament at that time and said, you know what, guys, we need to pass this thing. But since you're not so ready to pass it, how about we sweeten the deal a little bit and put this money of 100 million at that time in your control? That's what you're saying.
Yes. So as to make sure that the members get this vote for this. Both of them are supposed to be voted to at the same time.
So they voted for it and kept the 100
No, they
million.
haven't. They haven't.
Uh-huh.
They haven't. I think the one that they have done is now the CDF one.
CDF, yes.
They have not done the 2,000 gender rule.
No, that's what I'm saying. They kept the 100 million for CDF and they chucked the 2/3 gender rule out the window.
Of course, it never saw the light of day. And of course, what I did is I looked through it because I said, but then what are you going to do with the Senate? Say, these people have been asking to be given a fund. I say, but what is the name of the fund? They say Senate Oversight Fund. I say, but every parliament the world over performs oversight work.
Yeah.
How is this fund? What is it going to do? What is it going to help a senator to do? I said, no. Give them something. There will be, something to buy vehicles because senators have been complaining. The MPs in the National Assembly use, they provide some vehicles with NGCDF in the constituencies when we move around. But when you check how this is, the senators feel very, very. They feel they are relegated, and you see, members of Parliament will go to a function and say, "I have built this school, I have done this." A senator has nothing to say, nothing to offer. So we say, "No, let's get." So I looked at it. I say, "But how can we just be looking at how to spend money?"
But this
Did you
is
register your displeasure at this?
Maybe if I said yes or no. That may not be good enough, but I did not write the letter.
Okay.
But
The letter was written by the president to the two speakers.
This the senator.
I think that should give you my answer.
Displeasure.
Because I looked at it and I did believe in it. One, this entrenchment of the CDF after the ruling, and remember this was so soon. The ruling was very fresh even in my mind. The issues that the Supreme Court raised. I said, but we are going to trample on this. I mean, what kind of country are we going to be? So it was said this Senate Oversight Fund, and then the women have been this gaff. So even that one we put it in the Constitution so that everybody will vote. Put Senate Oversight Fund. It's something small for the senators. What we call chakula ya wazee. It's not money that they are going to use for anything. I had somebody saying that they will call meetings and that they will need to facilitate people. How do you account for that? So buying people mandazi in a meeting, in a public rally, buying people tea, buying people water, soda. That's how taxpayers' money is going to be spent. How do you account? Surely. And how many people are you going to in a county? Remember, a senator represents a county.
But was this coming from the senators, or was this coming from members of Parliament trying to loop in the senators so that this thing can go through approvals?
The senators had always looked for something, some fund, something that they can do. But now, unfortunately, look at Article 96. Article 96, Clause 1 says the Senate represents the counties and serves to represent the interests of county governments. And Clause 2 says the Senate participates in the law-making function of Parliament only when considering bills that concern counties. Clause 3 is the most critical for the Senate because it gives them the oversight over counties and county governments with regard to the monies that are what is called the share of revenue, which the monies that are devolved from after the division of revenue. that oversight role is what our Senate has consistently, inadequately performed. But they say that they need money to do this. So you wonder, but every parliamentarian, and remember, our senators don't like being called parliamentarians. Yet Article 93 says there is established a parliament of Kenya which shall consist of the National Assembly and the Senate. So all of them are members of parliament. So if they are parliamentarians, they still have to do those three roles. For them, specifically, Article 96(3), clause 3, that oversight function is already there. The National Assembly in Article 95 also performs oversight over national government. But so if you say you are giving one a fund to do oversight, then you must also give another fund. It will not be long before the National Assembly says we also need a fund to do oversight, and the county assemblies will also say, the MCAs will also say we also do oversight over the county government. Yeah. So I mean, when we raise it, all this money is in recurrent use.
Is this taking advantage of some loopholes? Because I'm looking at that Article 96 and the third one you're just mentioning, exercising oversight over national revenue allocated now to counties. The argument, which is a field argument, is that then senators are expected to visit county projects, hold public forums, and compile reports on either misused, stalled projects or underperformance by the county executives. The other part is because the SOF, as they are calling it, would be seen as a way to equalize then oversight, where you have the capacity from members of parliament using the CDF. Now you also want senators who had previously had no similar fund now to also have their fund to oversight. Is there a fund for them to do these functions, according to Article 96?
There's no fund, just like there's no fund for the National Assembly. You just look at Article 95, just above there. Clause 4, you'll see they also oversight the national government in expenditure. So this thing about creating funds, this is just largesse for people. It is misuse of taxpayers' money. And I mean, for me, I am very clear. We cannot say this wrong, because it is wrong to have NGCDF. Then we want to create another wrong by creating the Senate Oversight Fund and then GAF. I mean, surely. So then what is the role of the executive at both levels? Isn't it to implement projects?
So JB, in your role as the Attorney General, one would hope that these are conversations, or as the Chief Advisor of Government, these are conversations you're having with the boss. Did you raise these with him? And if so, what was the response?
Well, he wrote a letter in December 2022. He is the one who wrote the letter to the two speakers, suggesting the amendments. I think he must have gotten some. There are some legal advisors also they are State House, although they are not known in law. But he has he has collected some people from the village who also tell him one or two. Some of them have even come to see me. Even let me just disclose to this country. One time they brought me a draft bill. This draft bill was seeking to create the office of First Lady. I read through it. I looked at the young man who brought it. I said, where did this come from? I was told. I threw it at him. I told him to take it back. What is this? What is this? A bill to establish the office of the First Lady. Do you know what this means? What kind of country is this we are creating? So when I'm saying that maybe some people advise him, because it is a fact that he is the one who wrote the letter to the two speakers. Because I refuse to do that, because I honestly, even to date, believe that going to amend the Constitution to entrench NGCDF and create the Senate Oversight Fund and creating GAF was going to be, first of all, is going to violate the Constitution itself by, obviously sidelining or setting aside the principle of separation of powers. But you see, instead of pursuing the issue of the 2/3 gender rule, the women have also been given some sweetener by being given this gaff.
Yeah.
You know, we are doing everything is being done, you know, in a very
So there seems to be an overt desire to circumvent what the law has said that you should do as members of parliament in the legislative arm of government. And in order to do that, there have been monetary sweeteners that have been given. And that has come from the very top. This is according to what you're saying. So
you can't say it better than what you have, the way you have said it.
Okay.
So it's a monetary sweetener to everybody.
Monetary sweetener to everybody.
So even the senators, that's why they are being given this sweetener.
Against constitutionalism. That's what we're talking, against the Constitution.
Absolutely.
So then the question comes for us, and then for everybody then, where then will the law ever prevail if monetary sweeteners are being handed out like hot dogs at the state fair to members of parliament who should be in the position where they should be oversighting, representing and legislating? Will anything ever get done if what we are seeing is that in the corridors of wherever that the promise of money is what is being dealt, and Kenyans are sitting here waiting, hopefully, that other laws will be made and livelihoods will be protected. But those seem to be far out the window if they know that, okay, we can debate day after day, Tuesday to Thursday we'll debate, but nothing will come out of it because we have what we want. JB, this is what you're saying.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Because our parliament has been reduced to just some place where you just go for money.
It's a house of transactions?
Transactions. And even then, just taxpayers' money. Because and that's why I keep saying that if we really implemented the Constitution properly, because the problem in this country is not the lack of laws. It's just implementation of the Constitution. We'll not even need to complain about this or the other, because the reports of the Auditor General would be discussed robustly, as we used to do in the yesteryears. I look back at some of the things that we used to do, I really wonder what has become of our today's legislatures. But unfortunately, because there are many, now we have the ones at the lower level, so I use the word legislatures guardedly. So I look at it and I wonder, who will now bail the cat? Remember, the auditor, we created, first of all, in the Constitution, we created the Office of the Controller of Budget, who produces reports quarterly on expenditure, tracking expenditure after budget has been passed. Every quarter, the Controller of Budget produces reports. Ask today, just ask a member of parliament when they last saw the report of the Controller of Budget. But they always have been arms against the Controller of Budget and the Auditor General. These are their technical arms that are supposed to help them perform oversight. Because you must be able to monitor how budget is being implemented. The reason why we split this office, it used to be Controller and Auditor General, but we split it into two, and both offices are anchored in the Constitution. We did that for purpose of efficiency, so that now the Controller, who authorizes the release of funds, you are able, and within 3 months, she's able to, as the case may be, she or he is able to produce reports and submit them to Parliament. They used to be produced by the former controller, and I'm sure even the current one is doing so. Agnes Odhiambo used to do it. Very, very, and really, part of the reason why I even recommended her to be given one of the national awards is because she did a thorough job. But every time I would ask members, please, these reports, they can't just be gathering dust.
They must go for something.
They mean something. Monitor the implementation of the budget. That is how oversight is done. But yes, it's true that at the end of the financial year, the Auditor General will now bring the report, the full report. But in the meantime, you have had occasion to look at how the budget that you passed is being implemented. Because if you find something untoward, you can then sanction whoever is at fault in the process of implementation. But that never seems to happen.
Well, if anything, this conversation has opened up the lid for us to really see a little bit of what is going on. And I think it's important why we have these conversations, JB, because then it helps people to be, number one, in the know, gather more knowledge, and then on towards a decision that they're likely to make when it comes to the ballot. Our time runs out, but we want to thank you for being here. This is part 2 of this episode. This is part 2 of this season. We'll do another one in the near future.
I'll be glad. I'll be glad anytime, because my interest has always been to see us, trying the level best to bring ourselves within the governance structure that we gave ourselves in adopting the Constitution 2010.
Indeed. Former Speaker of the National Assembly, former AG, and former CS, Public Service, J.B. Muturi has been our guest this hour. Thank you for doing this. At 2 minutes past 8, good morning.
This is the Situation Room